Magical Doropie was released for the Famicom in 1990 and for the NES a month later, but under the name the Krion Conquest, which I believe is one of the stupidest alternative names that could ever be thought of. Even though they're both the same game, there are some significant changes involving the plot, the transitioning to different parts, continue feature removed, the graphical designs, and the character's name from Doropie to Francesca. The Famicom version featured all of the cutscenes, while the NES counterpart have little to none whatsoever, and the minor characters weren't given any names for the Krion. For this review, I'm going to be focusing on Magical Doropie, since I despise the heavily butchered American version because of Nintendo's strict regulations, which for some reason didn't apply to the Famicom. Strange that Nintendo gave their origin country no limits but drew the line for us Americans, but later on we got more violent video games on their consoles. So enough about Nintendo's hypocrisy. The game is obviously a side-scroller where you go from point A to B, killing enemies along the way. You know, the same old stuff, this and that, yada yada, la-di-da-di-da, all that well and good. Now when you first play this game, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Seriously, just watch this gameplay footage for a few seconds. Yep, Mega Man. Doropie doesn't just borrow a few elements from Mega Man like many other good games. It literally clones it full hog. Same character animation, same blaster, same control scheme, same layout, same attacks, and in all the same routine. Now be prepared because we're going to reference Mega Man a lot in this review. In fact, this game pretty much mirrors everything of Mega Man that I'm surprised Capcom didn't sue Victokai. At least not that I know of. Before I get back to the game, there's another element of the NES version that bothers me that I just need to get off my chest. Particularly, the box cover. Look at this woman here. Does this woman look anything remotely like the in-game character at all? Look how ridiculous this is. She doesn't look like a witch to me. She looks like an overdressed nurse portrayed by Cher or Robin Curtis or Demi Moore. Actually, no, I take that back. This woman looks hotter than her. Who knows, maybe it's Kiki from Kiki's Delivery Service as a MILF. And boy, what a MILF she's become. Also, is it me, or is that Darth Vader in the upper left corner? If people actually thought Vader was in this game just because they saw that, boy, did their hopes drown fast. Oh, and let's not forget the fucking Phoenix Pokemon Moltres and the Mega Man 2 Robot Master Reject. Now, just because this game uses a lot of elements from Mega Man, that doesn't mean that it's a terrible game. Once you see past this obvious fact, it's actually a pretty good game, but it does have some flaws which I'll address as this goes on. For the story involved, it's 1999 and it's a time of war when the Akudama Empire is on the move and bringing terror on their enemies. It seems that nothing can destroy them or their leader, Empress Alicia, but for some odd reason, the Empire and its army of robots are vulnerable to magic. Kagemaru, a hired mercenary, is in the middle of all the chaos happening, and during a skirmish with a few cybernetic bots, he manages to summon the only non-sealed witch, Doropie, who now has to stop the rising forces of the Empire and Alicia. Not the greatest story, but whatever, it's good enough. It's not gonna get me through happy hour unscathed, but it's better than a citation. The gameplay is heavily similar to Mega Man, but there are a few differences. For one thing, you're a little anime witch instead of the blue bomber, but the moving and shooting animations are the same. What's original is that you could shoot upwards. No joke. This is kind of like a godsend because there were times in Mega Man that I really wanted to shoot directly up with the blaster. What's also different is the ability to charge your wand and release a huge blast. Mega Man 4 came out later the same year as Doropie, with their introduction to the charging ability. So I guess you could say that Capcom borrowed from Victokai in this case. The way you pause and bring up your list of abilities is exactly the same thing in Mega Man, but when you start this game, you have all the abilities in your possession. To make the similarities more obvious, Doropie changes colors for each ability. The fire ability is pretty effective because when you select it, a flaming phoenix will appear, wiping out every enemy possible on the screen. But the downside to this is that it drains half of your health, and there are times that it doesn't destroy all of the enemies in one swoop. So I would only suggest fire when there's a lot of enemies on the screen and you have enough health. Otherwise, it just acts like your normal blaster, which is what every other ability does if not executed correctly. The freeze ability lets you freeze enemies, but you have to charge your wand in order for the cold to be effective. You can't just shoot them normally like in Metroid, no. and the enemies only stay frozen for a few seconds. And what's worse is that you can't use them as a stepping stone when they're frozen. The ball weapon is probably the only weapon I find the most effective in this game. It allows you to take out enemies in areas that you can't seem to reach with your normal blaster, even if you shoot up. The shield creates a temporary shield when you charge it, but it only stays active for a while before losing its juice. The negative aspect of this is that if you have a shield up, but you switch to a different ability, it disappears just like that. And what witch isn't prepared without her trusty black cat? If only there was one here, but instead it's the broom. The broom allows you to travel in the direction you shoot at. I'm disappointed with this because it's not like the rush jet in Mega Man. Not only could you shoot freely, but you could travel just about anywhere. Also, why doesn't Doropie just grab onto the broom with her hands and legs like a normal witch instead of standing on it, trying to be like the rush jet? Also, the way this broom functions is a problem because if you hit the wall or ceiling, the broom disappears, which can lead you to death traps like spikes or pits. All of these weapons, besides the balls, I find either useful to some degree or completely useless. Why is it that they couldn't give you more useful weapons in Doropie like in Mega Man? In those games, all of the weapons have a purpose, even ones that seem to serve the least. Here, you have to think harder to use these weapons in the right way, but you just want to keep moving instead. I would have appreciated the developers more if they made these weapons more reliable, but then again, considering how much of a pain in the ass it was to edit the shit out of this game to meet the damn American guidelines and getting so frustrated over it and cutting a lot of crucial parts altogether, maybe I'm asking too much. The mechanics aren't too bad, but they could have been improved. In each level, like I mentioned, you go from point A to B in each part. If you die at any time, you go back to the start of that part. No checkpoints whatsoever. If you play the Japanese version, thankfully you get a continue feature because this game is hard enough as it is, and I'll get into that later. There are 3 parts in each level, and after you complete those, you'll get an alert screen flashing as you enter the battlefield against a boss, and before you face them, a description of the upcoming boss types out. This is similar to Mega Man 6, where you select a level with the boss, it shows their bios, but that game didn't come out until a couple of years after this, so I guess once again Capcom left an IOU. The boss battle seems hard at first, but once you know what to do, you won't have much trouble taking them out. In these battles, I always find the balls very useful. In fact, they're probably the only useful weapon in these battles besides your regular wand. Even though the gameplay is similar to Mega Man in appearance and direction, it doesn't play the same way. With all that out of the way, let's get to the appearance of this. The graphics are pretty good. Again, they look similar to Mega Man. I like how it's all nicely detailed, but some of the enemies strike some resemblance to that of a few enemies in Mega Man. Doropie herself looks pretty cute, but then again her sprite is inspired by the Blue Bomber himself, so of course he's gonna look like his cousin or sister, if he had one. The level environments are nice themselves, but I think there's a bit less to show off here compared to Mega Man. The cutscenes are kind of awesome, but it sometimes feels a bit underwhelming and the animation is nicely done. I especially like this particular cutscene of the antagonist monitoring Doropie running everywhere over the screen trying to escape while she bawls like a baby. This kind of animation of Doropie is typical in animes in Japan and generates some humor. They also included scenes where the minor character was beaten to a bloody pulp, bleeding to death, and obviously this wouldn't make the cut in the US. The sprites in the game are nice too. Overall, the graphics are good enough. The control mechanics are the exact same thing from Mega Man games, but there are a few exceptions. The up button can be used to shoot upwards. However, the controls feel a bit tighter than in Mega Man because when you jump, Doropie doesn't project herself as far as Mega Man can, and this can be a problem at times trying to nail jumps and find out that you're off, and when you fall, you're not given much chance to maneuver freely. The shooting is okay, but it feels slightly sluggish compared to Mega Man. Sure, you can shoot a lot of projectiles while standing, but shooting while you're on the move feels kind of laggy. Also, in order to release a charged up shot, you have to hold the B button until the meter at the bottom of the screen says go. But when it's not fully charged and you release it anyway to try to get a quick shot on an enemy, nothing will happen and the joke's on you. Aside from those few flaws, the controls are alright, but they can be a bit frustrating. Speaking of that, there's the difficulty, and my god, does this game kick your balls. Right from the start, this game is difficult, and I mean difficult. How? In Mega Man, sometimes when you kill an enemy, those black balls will replenish some of your health along with fueling your weapons and earning a few other items. But in Doropie, there's very few health icons far in between that you'll most likely get killed before you find even one. and almost 80% of the time, these enemies will leave behind nothing to replenish your health. During the game, every time you get hit, you lose more health than you should, and if you're not cautious, I can guarantee that you'll get killed within the first 5 or 10 minutes. The game is gracious enough with the continue feature, but if you play the butchered American version, good fucking luck. Challenge is one thing, but this is almost like a fucking torture fest, especially with enemies like the ones flying over you and coming back to dive down at you, and they are so fucking annoying. I swear, I couldn't beat this game without save states, though I normally use save states for review purposes, but this is just ridiculous. It may not look hard, but believe me, it is. The music in the game is nicely done. Nothing bad, but nothing stands out from the rest, and none of the tunes are memorable. The sound effects are alright, but they're not worth going into depth. It's also interesting to note that in the Famicom version, there's a couple of cheats that allows you to play 2 other characters, Kagemaru, the minor character that's seen in some of the cutscenes, and an alternate Doropie in like a Red Riding Hood costume or something like that. Maybe it's a totally different character with no name whatsoever. Aside from the fact that Magical Doropie is a full clone of Mega Man, this game is pretty good and it has some replay value. The story isn't an original, neither is the gameplay, but it is what it is. It's also interesting to know that there was going to be a sequel to this game on the Super NES, but for some reason, the developers couldn't afford the Super NES developing kit they needed, thus the game was never made. What's even crazier is that the same company managed to make and release a Super NES game a couple of years later. Which brings up the question, if they said they couldn't afford the Super NES developing kit, how the hell were they able to develop a game for the 16-bit console anyways? Why couldn't they work on the sequel instead of that game? We'll never know. For now, this is what there is. If you're looking for something different or want a game without its contents being tampered by us Americans, I'd suggest checking this out, or if you want an extreme challenge, play the Krion. Doropie isn't popular, but it sure is a unique specimen. Thanks for watching. I'm Riley Sky. See you later. Balls, balls, balls. How she likes to play with them balls. I guess Doropie's got balls of steel.